Yeah. Oh yeah. Right. So 10:30. Is that the over or the under? You know what I mean? Well, I mean, hey, we've seen it go all sorts of directions, right? Okay. Sounds good. So yeah, how's it going, buddy? Good. Everyone's here.
I know.
Every time I'm like, can I use a gold pizza and flowers. Tip.
You know what?
They're super cheap.
I know. I should think about that.
Okay.
I go over there. I go over there for the exactly. I go over there specifically for the pickles. I love their big white pickles.
Order in the court. Good evening and welcome to the West Hartford Board of Education regular meeting. May I have the roll call, please?
Mrs. Blanks?
Here.
Dr. Greenberg?
Here.
Mr. Levine?
Here.
Mr. Paul Uke?
Here.
Ms. Poland?
Here.
Dr. Thomas Farquharson?
Here.
Mr. Zdanowitz?
Here.
Grace Andrews?
Here. Thank you. Grace, it has to be your turn regardless.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Just to say, Maddie isn't blowing us off. She's ill. So we hope she gets better. We do have a revision to the agenda order. After, we have no student participation, is that right? So after public communications, we're going to ask Grace if she will give us her update, because we're not sure how long the budget conversation is going to go, and I don't want to make her stay till tomorrow. Any other revisions? Okay. No student participation, and so public communications, David Simon.
Thank you very much. David Simon, 168 Westland Avenue. I am a teacher here in West Hartford. I am a parent of students who've gone through the system, and a proud resident of West Hartford. And as we start these conversations tonight, I'd just like to bring up a couple of points quickly. You know, one of the things that people constantly say about West Hartford is that they moved here because of the schools. I'm a teacher, I'm sorry. Has anybody heard that? You can raise your hand? Yeah? Okay, I think we've all probably heard that, right? And as a result, that is part of our town's legacy. And it's very important to be able to maintain that legacy as we move forward in these conversations about a budget tonight. Previously, before becoming a teacher, I did own some businesses, and I'm very aware that unless you invest in your business, your chances of success are greatly diminished. And I think that West Hartford has a similar case. We have a standard of education that we've been able to maintain, and it is important that we maintain that in order to continue developing and attracting people to West Hartford that will maintain that standard and have the interest that we share in education. As a result, really any cuts to the budget as a teacher, I know, are putting in jeopardy the quality of our schools. We have seen in the recent past examples of districts very close to us that have cut school budgets, that have cut programs, and we've seen the effects that has had on those communities. The effects have not been good in general, and you don't have to look very far to see those. As a result, as a teacher and as a parent, my children were given the opportunities here in West Hartford that, coming from another country, were absolutely incredible. They were given attention that would have been very difficult to achieve in the country from which they came, and also rivaled those of some of the private education that I was able to attain or receive through the interest in education of my parents. As a teacher, I am constantly reminding my colleagues who say, there aren't enough laptop carts and there isn't this. I say, we teach in a public school. We teach in a public school district. And it's pretty good. A ex-principal at the school where I teach now at Hall once said that even if we were the #1 school in the country, it still wouldn't be good enough. I don't necessarily agree with that philosophy. However, it did reflect the drive and interest in education that we have here in West Hartford. As a result, I would ask the board to please take those points into consideration as we consider the budget for the upcoming year. Thank you very much.
Thank you. But before we consider the budget, let's hear from Grace, the highlight of our evening at the beginning.
The African American Cultural Society will be presenting in room 169 on April 6th the whole entire day, and its purpose is to celebrate while informing our school community on the culture and history of African Americans. And we encourage all students to attend and be interested, and we're welcoming classes to come in, and there'll be like deliberations and presentations going on, so it's a really fun event to take part in. Tomorrow at 7 p.m., Conard's band will be performing, and that's really all that's happening. We're all very excited for spring break.
Imagine that. Again, Maddie is ill, but both Maddie and Grace have finally heard from colleges, and so we wish you the best of luck in your decision-making, and we look forward to hear what happens. Okay, and while you can go home, and if it gets too late, you should feel free. We would love to have your input as we go along. So, but now we move to our unfinished business, which is the adoption of the 2018-2019 Board of Education budget. So may I have a motion, please, that the Board of Education review the superintendent's proposed budget in the amount of $164,551,527, make revisions as necessary, and adopt the 2018-2019 Board of Education budget.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Thank you. We are being joined by all our specialists, but before we do, I just want to make a point to the listening audience at home and in the audience here. Whatever we decide tonight, whether we decide to go with the budget as is or cut more things, I just want to be clear that we asked Tom Moore to put no gimmicks into this proposed budget. We didn't want to put extra things in just so that we could look strong to cut them out. Not visible in this budget, but in reality, has already been cut an instructional coach, 2 secretaries in the central office, 3 FTE because the original request was for 8.5 FTE for the high schools, 3 paras, 1.5 TAs, and 1 maintenance line. So just to be clear, we have not only cut finances, but we've cut, unfortunately, people from the budget already. So regardless of what happens from here on in, I just want to commend Tom and you all and us as the board for holding the line to say that we have to keep things absolutely as tight as they can be. So, discussion about the budget. And just to be clear, if anyone does want to make any changes in the budget, that has to come in the form of a motion and a second. So the floor is open to conversation. I have something to say, but I want to make sure that nobody's got motions first, because I just wanted to say something generally about the budget. Oh, no, that's, I was going to say something in case there was nothing to change. So if there are proposals to change, let's do that first.
Okay, I feel like it's like, who's going to say something first? I also want to thank Tom and staff for this budget. I have a slightly different take on what an actual cut really means. And I just think that should go on record that while I understand real people are cut, when we reduce a requested allocation from a higher number to lower number, it's not really a cut if those people don't actually exist. I wanted to review a few things that Tom was kind enough to put out last year for discussion tonight and possible motion if there is support from the list that he had presented to the board last year. An easy one that I thought to start with would be something that was discussed last year, which is reducing the PE credit requirements from 1 1/4 to 1. So I'll make a motion that we should do that. It's $110,000 savings, and we're still at the state mandated amount at that point. So
is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, discussion. Do you want to talk about it, or you just want to?
So, I mean, I just discussed it. I mean, I watched the video from last year. Several of you were here for that, but those of us that are new to the board, I assume you guys have already read this, where, again, it's H5 from last year, where, again, it's reducing the PE credit requirement from 1.25 to 1. It doesn't, in my opinion, impact anything substantial, and it's a six-figure saving. So that's why I brought it up.
Just to be clear, if anybody happens to have last year's list from March 7th, 2017, it's under the additional budget reductions for consideration by the board, high school reductions.
May
Yeah, can we clarify?
So maybe you can
offer a clarification? I think there was a typo in the original form, so your graduation requirements, your board graduation requirements are for 1.5 credits of PE, and I believe that proposal last year was to reduce it to 1.25. In addition, currently there is a 0.25 health credit requirement separate from physical education. The only other clarification I'd like to offer just for your discussion is that the new graduation requirements, which commence for the class of 2023, they sustain a 1.0 credit for PE, and they add a 1.0 credit for health. So at the end of the day, our PE health staff at the high school, students are going to require 2 credits in health, whereas currently your graduation requirements today require 1.75.
just so that just to get the numbers straight. So currently, we require a half credit in health, right? That's what.
A 0.25 credit in health and a 1.5
Oh, just 0.25. That's what when you take it
PE.
over the summer. That's a quarter credit.
It's quarter credit.
That's okay. My apologies.
So your total health PE currently is 1.75. The state requirement that exceeds the state requirement. However, the new state requirement with the class of 2023 will be for a combined 2.0 credits in both health and PE.
Yeah, so that happened after, when they clarified, after we did the budget last year, when they clarified the graduation requirements, which, as you know, had been on hold. They were initially supposed to be for the 2018 class, and they kept getting pushed back. Now they're for the class of 2023, so our current 7th graders is that, now the issue with this is the state requirements will go up to 25 credits, which inevitably here will mean at some point we have to add FTEs significant amount to the high school so the kids can take that number of credits. So any shift in this PE now would have to be readjusted within a year or two, and you would have to change your own policy to go down and then change your policy to go up.
But again, I'm just trying to understand the numbers here. The PE the PE people and the health people are two different.
They're for the
Or are they
most
the same
part,
people?
most are dual certified PE and health.
Okay, so in fact, we can go from 1 and 1. I mean, from 1.5 and 0.5 or whatever it is we can shift around. It's not like we would have to let go some people and hire other people.
Correct. And
Okay.
in the new, with college programs now, a lot of the folks are, they're designing the program with that in mind.
Thank you. I just wanted to understand. Comments, thoughts?
So I can't remember if I said this last year publicly or maybe it was just brainstorming, but it would take our state legislators to help us out with this one. When I went to school, I didn't have to take PE because I did sports. And those off seasons that I didn't play a sport, we actually had to take PE. So I would make the recommendation that, and nothing that we can do here, but I'd like to see our legislators get involved in this, since they're another, kind of unfunded mandate, right? Exactly what this is that if we could move forward, that if you happen to play a varsity sport, that you don't have to take PE that particular semester or that course. That would, in a sense, save time, because all the kids that play a varsity sport would be exempt from a PE class that particular cycle. So I think it would be helpful with us overall, and I think it would be good legislation, and it would save some money. over in the long run, and give us our kids some free time, some of those athletes to study in school. So nothing we can do with this board, but not sure how to push it up, but I would like to see something of that sort go forward.
May I just ask a question? Again, this is just my ignorance. Varsity as opposed to junior varsity, or is junior varsity not a thing?
It was just a, you know, a crawl, walk, run. Varsity sports, you're playing at the highest level of a high school sport, and that potentially don't have to take the PE. So that, in my mind, it was varsity sport. So.
A question for clarification. The additional budget reduction document from last year indicates that this is $110,500 savings, and I see $58,000 on the screen. So I just want to get an accurate assessment of
The 58
this.
is the correct number.
Okay.
This was what was discussed at the board adoption meeting. There were some minor changes.
The tweak should be 1.5 to 1.25. I guess here's the question in terms of how you want to do this, because as you recall, I mean, we're talking about P in general, which any PE teacher watching this is getting offended right now, talking about, well, you're just talking about it in the most general of terms, whether right or wrong. We did have a presentation on it, long presentation, that was last year before the new board was on. I guess my question is, how much do you want Paul to go into what PE is actually doing? And that's the question here is, you know, because we have the same things we prepared last year to talk about each of these in terms of why it's not something we're recommending as a cut, or why we didn't include it in the cuts to start with. So that's my question, or do you just want to talk about it amongst yourselves? It's just a function.
I don't have an answer, except to say that my general feeling is that any cut that would actually have an impact either on students or on hiring, I mean, people who are already hired, we ought to have a conversation about, but we ought not, we could have a conversation about, but we ought not to vote on it, but I mean, to vote to cut it, but that's just my personal opinion. That having said that, though, I would argue that we might need to have a conversation in order to say, okay, look into this for the future or whatever. But I don't know whether that means we need a full-blown presentation, or it kind of depends on what you're thinking, because 3 of us have had the presentation, and 4 of us have had the presentation, and 3 have not. So this is up to the 3 of you.
I think the fair ramification of this, and I'm not saying it's not fair to have a discussion. I mean, this is what you do. You vote on the budget. The part of this that I feel like I'm letting my own staff down is that last year I spent 6 weeks going to all 16 schools and talking to people about your name's going to be out there as a cut, and you may be cut. And so those people had an opportunity to come here and talk about it. And we're just doing this tonight. And so people are watching at home now, and I know who they are, and they're thinking, my job's on the line? And nobody said anything to me? Tom didn't say anything to me? That's not the reputation I've worked to have as a superintendent. So I'll be honest with you, I don't think it's fair. If that's the amount you want cut, that isn't the place I'd cut it from. It's not, because those people also, jobs have already been posted. So they're going to lose their job on April 1st, April 3rd, whatever tonight is. That's not fair to do to somebody with a family. That's not the way West Hartford treats its employees historically.
Again, I think the two questions that I'm interested in, and you're answering one of them, is what is the impact of this cut? Is it a real job, or is it a number thing? And you've answered the question, it is a real job. And that brings me to at least my second argument, which is we can talk all we want, but it is inappropriate to vote yes on something like that without any kind of community conversation. But that's my personal opinion. So in a way, I want to turn it back to, I guess, you, Rob, since you made the recommendation. Do you want to proceed on arguing that we should cut anyway, or do you want to proceed on the conversation that it is, I mean, in general, whatever your requests are, that it's important to have the conversation and hear about it, but not necessarily vote to cut anything now? And I'm just asking that as a genuine question.
So I guess welcome to the board. Yeah, look, cuts are never easy. And we're talking about people here, but the idea that these problems are going away is a fallacy. It was a huge problem last year. It's still there this year, guys. It's still there. It's going to come back in full force next year. So if there are achievable savings in this budget, which I think there are this year, we should consider them. I am all about fairness. It's how I've always tried to be. I don't think it's necessarily a fairness question because these things were discussed last year. They weren't enacted, but you can't just stick your head in the sand for a year or two and then say, well, we'll notify people again when we think it's a real concern. The concern has always been there. It's still there. It's not going away. I mean, I can say that, I guess, 10 times. I might end up doing that, so forgive me. So that's why I wanted to talk about these things. I don't know how we get around the awkwardness of that we're talking about people. But this is not a machine shop. This is not a private industry where we're making widgets. We traffic in people, and that's what we do. We hire people to teach our kids to maintain our schools, to clean our schools, to manage our schools. It's people, folks. So I get it. But we are in crisis mode in this state, and this city is right on the bullseye as far as funding goes for a variety of things. And so for me, I'm just not a wait and see kind of guy because I know what's coming next year. And we've got to try, if any savings that we can achieve this year makes next year a little bit easier because we've already achieved that savings. So it doesn't, and it also doesn't have to be an either or proposition every decision that we make. We can achieve savings this year because we see that as a savings in this year. In the next year, if we need to adjust, if we need to make an audible and do something different, then we can adjust for that at that time. That's being flexible and that's being creative. If we constantly do a roll forward budget because we're worried about the reputation of our schools in general and hurting people's feelings that someone might get laid off because we can't afford to pay them anymore because we don't have the slack in the budget, that's what we're supposed to do as elected officials. I mean, we've got to maintain the sanctity and the reputation of this school district at all costs. And that doesn't mean just always approving a roll forward budget and saying that's the best that we can do. We have to face realities. We have to say sometimes we have to make the hard choices. And somebody's going to get hurt. And somebody's not going to like it. We can't be everything to everyone. You have to be okay with saying no sometimes and not being popular. So it's not fun. It's not something we want to do. But that's why I'm bringing these things up tonight, because I think it's the situation that we are in. You can ignore the fact for this year that we are not in trouble because it's not right in our face. But everybody on this board should know, and in the audience, if you don't know, that these problems that were here last year are going to be in our face again next year. Because it ain't an election year for them next year, folks. So they're going to come to us. So we should start planning now. And that's why I want to discuss these things tonight.
But when it was a crisis last year, and they were brought up, the community spoke clearly what they demanded from education.
Some of the community, right?
Well,
some of the community.
Well, about 450 people at Charter Oak.
Okay.
And then another time. And the board voted based on that at that point.
No, I understand
When it
that.
was a definitive crisis at that moment,
I
the town
understand.
stood up for education.
Some of the town.
Well, there wasn't a referendum.
Right.
So I think it goes pretty clearly that 400 people came out, said what they demanded, and then there was not enough motion for a referendum to vote the budget down once it was passed. I think the community spoke clearly at a time of crisis that they will stand up for the schools.
I think communities always have a very vocal segment of the population on issues. And so I think those people can get marshaled at times that they are concerned, and they can do that. And it doesn't mean it's the entire community, therefore, the voice of the whole community. It's the active people that are very heated, very emotional about that moment. So I don't disagree with you, but I refute the notion that that means that's what the entire community wanted as a majority opinion. It's what the people that were marshaled to come out and speak were willing to do.
If I can just disagree with you just briefly, and I completely hear with you. I hear what you're saying. Obviously, it's not the whole community, but if a majority of the community actually disagreed about what we did, there was an election last year, and all of the Democrats would not have gotten reelected. Again, I'm not, of course, we're all wonderful people. We should have gotten elected on our own.
Yeah, don't agree there either, but that's okay. Of course we don't. It's easy to say that the election results are the result of the will of the people, but what was the turnout last year, 30%?
Well, but the people who cared showed up.
Same argument I just made. Same argument I just made.
But certainly the people who cared should be the ones who care. I'm not following you.
Wait, are you just saying the people that voted are the only ones that matter?
No. I'm saying if the people who cared came out to speak and the people who cared came out to vote.
So no one else cares if they don't come out to vote or speak?
I don't know what they think.
It doesn't mean they don't care.
Right, but they don't, well, right.
I just want just a point of clarification for last year, because I asked the question. I asked, who in the audience were, and to be fair, the people that came out, it was 85% teachers. And
that is wildly untrue at charter.
I asked them to raise their hands.
Yeah, no, I said there were a lot there, but there was.
But that's when I said, can you please raise your hand?
Well, you just said 85%, Mark, and that's wildly untrue.
It was a majority. It was a majority of teachers.
Even if it were, which I reject, the difference between a majority is 51% versus 85%. That's a pretty big range in there.
It was, I mean, no sense to get mad. It was overwhelmingly teacher supported.
No.
It was.
All right, so I just want to bring this back to the actual topic of reducing PE credits. I think that I understand exactly what Rob is saying, that this is something that West Hartford is doing that's over and above the state requirements. And maybe it is an area where we should think about changing either how we count PE, if we can do that without state involvement, or talk to our representation at the state legislature to get their assistance on that. My concern is, and I'll sort of echo what Tom said, I would really like to have heard a little bit more community input on this, and I think part of that is our fault. If we had brought this idea up at either the budget workshops, then the community would have known, because Ronnie would have written about it, or Michaela would have written about it in the Current, or the word would have spread that we were thinking about this cut. But because we didn't bring this up until now, that makes me really uncomfortable, because we haven't really provided an opportunity for the community to tell us how they feel. Of course, this cut was always an option for us. Anybody who wanted to look at last year's options or just think about what we might cut this year might have written to us about this. But I think it's much different when you hear somebody actually say it out loud. That's what maybe causes you to take action. And again, part of that's our fault for not raising these ideas during the budget workshops. So because we didn't, and because this is just coming up tonight, that makes me uncomfortable about voting for this idea regardless of its merit.
And so I would argue that if you're not outside of your comfort zone, then maybe you're not really putting forth the town's best interests. Like, these decisions are all out of my comfort zone, just so you know. I don't sit here and relish the things that I am saying. Okay, I value everybody in this town and what they do, but my background is all about balancing budgets. I think anybody who looks at their checkbook month in and month out, whoever that person is in the house, whichever spouse or whichever individual is doing that, knows exactly what we're talking about here tonight, where you make decisions every month in your household, what you can afford and what you can have to wait on, or what you decide is not doable. We somehow feel like we lose that when we come into a government arena, it seems, to a certain degree, where all of a sudden, maybe because it's not us balancing the books every month and writing those checks, maybe we just don't feel that impact as much as what we do in our personal lives. But it's, if anything, even more important, because the numbers are so much bigger and the impact is so much greater, because we're talking about our entire town. So I sit here tonight, and as a board, I implore us to say it's not just good enough to do a roll forward budget. I did say that at the budget workshops. I have discussed some of this stuff before. Unfortunately, none of you folks were really here. So, I mean, that's the problem, is that the town doesn't engage the way we would like. I mean, the Board of Ed, we had 2 meet and greets out in the community, and no one showed up to one of them, guys. And we had 4 people at the other one. So anybody watching on TV, or those of you here tonight, it's like, you know, you had your chance. Like, you had your chance to show up and talk to us and hear what we were thinking, and you didn't do it because it's not last year.
No, because they're okay with the roll forward.
I don't
They didn't
think
come
so.
out to be opposed to it. When people are angry, that's when they're agitated and they come out. So yes, if we had put it out, a ton of people would have come out. But when people saw a 2.94% increase, they didn't come out because they're not mad. Because anger is what motivates people, not kindness and niceness to support things. It's anger.
Can I just intervene for a second? Because both of you are talk about a roll forward budget as if we didn't already cut. And I just want to say, which has nothing to do with the larger picture, but again, I'll say what I said before. We cut an instructional coach, a secretary in the central office, 3 paras, 1.5 TAs, and a maintenance person, even leaving out the extra FTEs. So we did already cut those things. This is not a roll forward budget. Sorry. Now I'll just be quiet.
It is a roll forward budget. I mean, I've heard that term throughout this process. I've heard that term throughout this process, roll forward budget. Is that not true? You don't remember that?
No, if I'm not mistaken, and you should tell me, I thought a roll forward budget meant we're doing everything exactly the same way as everything that we did last year, we're doing again, just with adjustment of price. Is that not? Maybe I'm mistaken. I thought that's what a roll forward budget meant.
Maybe it's semantics. I mean, I've heard throughout this process, I don't think I'm the only one, that we've talked about a roll forward budget. So whatever. I mean, it's terminology. It doesn't really matter.
No, it doesn't matter. I just wanted to make the point that there were cuts, but that's not to speak to your issue at all.
I think that's great, Cheryl, and it's great that you're coming on record saying that. I'm just saying there's more that needs to be done, you know? I hear what you're saying, Tom, and, you know, I totally respect your opinion. I just don't know that it's okay to make the assumptions because people don't show up angry that means it's an acceptance factor. I mean, it's easy to say that, but if you think that there may be another opinion out there that maybe people are not okay with it, but it doesn't mean that it rises to the level of anger that they show up here tonight. Maybe that could be true too. And so then what do we do, right? Because nobody likes to cut people. They're the people, I mean, that's how our schools run, right? But what do we do then? Where is the middle ground? Where is the compromise as far as a roll forward budget with minimal cuts versus, you know, someone saying we cut everything? Well, there should be some middle ground in there where we still are providing the educational system that West Hartford prides itself on, but that we are tightening our budget, knowing what happened last year is going to come back next year, so that it makes it, it's all about making it a little bit easier, right? I mean, that's the whole goal, is to make it a little bit easier next year and the year after, because any cut we do this year that's in place for next year, right? Like, it's already a savings. So that's what I'm about.
I'd like to say, if I may, this would be a great conversation for workshop number 2. Remember workshop number 1, we presented the budget. We had time to go over it, go through it, come up with some questions. And if this is workshop number 2 right now, this would be a great conversation for it. The night that we're voting on the budget, and Rob, you came up with some specifics that you emailed to Tom last night, less than 24 hours before the vote. It's difficult to review and as a board member to give it proper consideration before we vote. Plus, the public input is important for these things that really affect people. I'm sure this is not, I know this is not the only idea you have or thing from last year that you'd like to discuss. And each one of these affects whether it's employees or students or schedules, something like that. So at this 11th hour, it's difficult for us to, at least for me, to give it proper consideration, and so I couldn't consider it, even though, as Deb said, it may be something I could agree with at some point. But at this point, when we're voting on the final budget, I can't vote for that at this time.
Okay, so I'll just respond to that. As I had said to you guys before, These things were all things that, at least those of you that were on the board last year, discussed at great length last year. So I'm not sure, at least for me it's a disconnect, and feel free to chime in, how this is 11th hour when these things have been out there for a year. And I did mention to you that I wanted to discuss some of these things, that I thought it was important enough that we have the discussion, and to just make the statement that the timing is off. It's like, well, then if we didn't vote on the budget till May, would that be enough time? Or it just seems like a bit of an excuse to never say, I would love you to go on record and say either, I'm up or down with this issue, and say like, yeah, I could support that or I can't. The timing issue to me, this is what we were elected to do. So, it's one thing if I had thrown out an idea to you at 11 o'clock last night that you had never heard of and Tom had no time to prepare for. I did not do that, frankly, because I'm not sure I know what those things are yet. Maybe when we're sitting here next year, I'll have been schooled enough to have some more original thought of my own. But considering that it's been a few months, and I've only been able to get out to a few schools, I felt like I had to rely on the document that was produced from last year. Nobody came out to our budget workshops. We talked about things to a degree at those things. People can watch the videotape. We talked as a board a little bit at the community outreach, even though no one showed. So I think it's, to me, at least my opinion, you can disagree, it's a little disingenuous to say that you haven't had time to think about these things.
I was going to say, Mark had something to say, and then Dave.
Just a kind of a process thing, two process issues. Some of us on this board previously remember that we had, I want to say one or two, I know one for sure, additional workshops. And we voted to eliminate that workshop because we ran into kind of the same problems where nobody was showing up, and I think we had less than a 1% budget at one point. Forgive me, I don't remember, but we did. And maybe we have to look at adding another workshop or two to replace the ones that we, Tom, did we remove one or two? Do you remember?
We removed one. We coalesced the special education into the general education workshop.
So I don't know, maybe it's an opportunity to look at that again so that there's more communication, because certainly that you can't over communicate. And then the other thing about the roll forward budget is I understand, and just to make clear, and correct me if I'm wrong, the roll forward budget is salary increases, medical expenses, and do nothing. No additional teachers, no additional anything. That's what a roll forward budget, and that's 2.31% this year. So the additional costs came from, so this is the caveat of the roll forward budget, came from enrollment needs at the high school, from our 8th grade going into high school with the 5.5, and I think we had 8.3 previous to the budget. Student, your original budget to us was 8.3 teachers. What was it? Cheryl, you had that number in front of you.
Yeah, it was 8 point something, and then, but even before it became a formal thing.
The FTE at the high school.
Right. Remember, we were talking about how many you actually needed, and then we talked about, and then you said, but you came down to 5.5.
If we were, yeah, I mean.
You originally asked for 8 point something, right?
Well, no, not formally. I've only asked for 5.5 the whole time.
But
yeah,
you
right.
made the comment that you were comparing us to other.
Oh, if that's the comparison, if we were another district, that's
right.
what, yeah.
I think that's what.
No.
I'm not sure where the 8.3 is.
Okay.
It's the question between, it wasn't formally proposed, it was informally noted that it would have, remember, that's when we had the conversation about, do we want the clean budget? And so the only formal proposal was the 5.5.
In a financial examiner's something, anyway. So I just want to make it clear, my whole point on that was that those are changes. I don't think we can consider those changes a roll forward as definition. So just for a point of reference, that the roll forward is salaries and medical expenses and doing nothing, exactly the same. And then everything beyond that is an addition to or a cut from the budget. I just want to make it clear. So those are the two things. If we can add potentially, and we have an entire year to talk about it, to add another meeting so that the communication is more, and to Rob's point, and maybe I'm to blame here, because I should be his right-hand man, is I sat right here probably 5 years ago at this exact same meeting, saying these exact same things and getting the same exact eyebrows. And and it wasn't the time, it wasn't the place, but, you know, when is the time and place? Where is it? You know, we probably, as a process, and we need to be clean on this, you know, maybe, and I always had a problem, and not a problem, that's not the right, I've always wanted a cleaner process for this. And when I was new, it just seemed a little ambiguous at points, because you come to this final day and you come with what you think is appropriate, and we never really talked about cuts previously. We would bring them right to here, and that would be the first time you'd hear them, and then we would discuss. So I think that we as a group can clean that process up so that when there are cuts, additions, and changes, that they're clearer and they are discussed in more length, and we have the opportunity to do it. I'm not saying not doing it here tonight is not the answer, but there is a better way of this process, and I think we as a group kind of could figure it out. We met at the Noah Webster House one time trying to smooth the process, and I think we were successful in doing certain things as a group to help streamline the efforts. And maybe we need to do that again so that everyone has the exact information, how, when, where, and what, you know, to process this process, you know.
If you don't mind, I might jump in before you come back, because I want to piggyback on your point, if I can, which is that after we had these discussions tonight, whatever that means, I was going to suggest that we start thinking about places that we might want to cut next year or change next year, and start the conversation with Tom and anybody else in like September. So, for example, I happened last time to vote for the PE cut. So, you know, when I say I'm not for it, I actually, at least last year, I was for it. My concern now is that it's happening without any warning about this year. Yes, they knew in theory, but nobody said, by the way, this is back on the table. So my discomfort is to make any decision at the last minute when people didn't know in advance that it might be coming. So what I was going to say was, maybe PE is one of those things, maybe teaming is one of those things, whatever. But whatever it is that we want to look at seriously for next year, I was going to suggest we make a list, maybe in a retreat, maybe somewhere else, and say to Tom, okay, we want plenty of time to think about this, not just a presentation, but we need a conversation about it, because we're going to have to think about what we're going to do next year. And then all of the issues that you're raising, for example, the issues that any of us are going to raise, we can put out and have a longer time to discuss, so that when the time comes for the budget conversation, we have a track record of having explored the background. So I completely agree with you, and I think we ought to formalize it in some structural way. So again, a vote against something now is not necessarily a permanent vote against it. It is simply an unwillingness to move forward without announcing it to the public in advance.
Just as a clarifying point in that, and I completely agree, conversation's the key ahead of time. I would just phrase it not as things we might want to cut. Right. I'd phrase it as topics to discuss. We're
Absolutely.
117th of 169
You're
towns,
right.
and all we're talking about is if we're spending wildly. We are the most efficient school district in the state. When you compare what we spend with the results we get, that's what we are. And all we're talking about tonight is how we're going to tear it down. It's unfathomable to me.
Okay, I don't know how reducing a PE credit by a quarter is tearing it down, but I'll read this stat to you that I looked up.
Here's how, okay? Because you're doing it blindly. Because you're making decisions based on, I don't see how. That's the whole problem. You don't see how, but you just say, let's do it. And you can do that with all of these things. Everything we do, we can cut, so we can say it's only half a person, it's only half a job, but then when you put them all together, then you add up with something that we continue to fall behind. Because all the classes, when we talk about the FTEs, cut the high school FTEs. Okay, I can tell you what classes won't run. And I can tell you how many less AP exams kids will be able to take because they won't be able to take the courses. Then I can tell you what that's going to do to U.S. News and World Report because I can tell you all those things because that's my job. But if we just say, what's one class? What's half a credit? Then that's where we run into, all of a sudden we just cut. And we're just thinking about cutting. When are we going to add a program? When are we going to add something that's going to make West Hartford better? All we're trying to do is stay afloat. And all we keep doing here is talking about what we're going to cut. West Hartford needs to do more than stay afloat. Because you're right, the state has dramatic problems. But our kids are going to be going off into that state. And our parents have unique demands. And I can ask every principal in the room, because they get 100 emails a day, and I get 1,000, telling me exactly what their parents expect and what they want for their kids when their kids go to college and apply. And we're not far. When you don't spend money, people can say money doesn't make schools. Well, money pays teachers. Money buys books. Money pays for programs. Money pays for kids to be in the program they need. You cut that, all of a sudden then we are in trouble. We are the last inner ring suburb, not just in Connecticut. I'd argue in New England that works. We're the last one. Everybody should be emulating what we do. And instead we're trying to emulate those communities that continue to cut and talking about that. And the kids will be left behind. And I have more faith in the people of this community because I talk to them all the time. And I don't believe anybody moves to West Hartford and thinks, gosh, I'm going to move here because my taxes are going to be low. They know what they're getting into when they buy their house. It's well aware what taxes are going to cost in West Hartford. So when I make that choice, I'm making that choice consciously because, damn it, my kids deserve it. And our kids deserve it, and we teach a more diverse range of kids than anywhere else in the state. We're actually diverse. And so the notion that all we should talk about is, well, we can't afford these things. We can't afford not to pay for these things.
Well.
Okay. Appreciate your comment. Give me a second.
Okay,
so
sure.
I just wonder if everyone else wants to applaud the fact that West Hartford is now in the top 10 for mill rate in the entire state. Does anyone want applause for that?
Is that for adjusted mill rate, Rob? Do you want to explain what that means or no? Do you want to explain that we include sewage and that we include trash and other places bill you separately? Or are we just going to use a funny number out there?
Okay. Also, West Hartford ranks 11th in the state for how the percentage of the budget is due to employee benefits, and West Hartford is also top 8 number, like in the whole state, increase in education spending from 2006 to 2016. So I know we rank 119, but it's not like we don't spend money, Tom. And I don't disagree with you at all. Maybe this surprises you. Everything that you said, I actually agree with, and I admire your passion, sir. I very much do. I guess I just sit here not only as a parent who has children in the schools, a spouse who has a wife that's a teacher, a small business owner who practices real estate, so I'm acutely aware of taxes and what that means for our housing population. So I wear all those hats. So if you think that there's no internal conflict going on within this person, trust me, it happens on a daily basis. I see lots of things too, by the nature of what I do and my comings and goings on a day in and day out basis. And I'll say it over and over again. I don't know if maybe people believe me or not. I am constantly impressed and in admiration of everything that you guys do. I don't say that for lip service because if I go home, my wife will beat me over the head. So I can't stress enough that there has to be compromise. Maybe it's just because of what I do for a living. Like when you go out to buy a house and someone's offering their house for $350,000, the seller, and as the buyer, you come in and you're like, well, I don't want to pay $350,000, so you offer $325,000. Well, I don't think a home sale would ever take place if those people wouldn't compromise in some way. It doesn't always work. Trust me, I've been there where someone's like, well, I want $350,000. But at some point, the person that wanted $325,000 and the person that wanted $350,000, if they want the deal to come together, they find a compromise. So I'm not sitting here tonight saying that cut is the only way to go. I am more than okay with what you proposed that you wanted to add to this budget. In fact, I found those programs very engaging. I'm just of the mind that, well, if we want to add things, we should always be having an eye to, is there anywhere that we could potentially make that cut so that we then are running as efficiently and effectively as possible? If we can never sit here and have an honest conversation about the state of our schools and possibly making those adjustments, then I'll just shut up and we'll just vote this budget in tonight. Because maybe that's just all you want us to do, and our role is to just approve the budget because that's the best that we can do and that's the best way forward. I believe that that's not true. I believe that there has to be compromise. If you want to add new things, propose it. We'll consider it. You did that, and I think we are all okay with those things. I don't think anyone sat here and said, I don't like those ideas. So in that vein, we support you. I just think that there has to also be consideration that we can't always say that we're going to roll forward and do things as we always have, and that there's never ever going to be an adjustment beyond small ones, because I think that's what we've done, what you've highlighted are small ones, to adjust as a town. I totally agree with you, Tom, that you're right. People know what they're getting when they go to buy a house in this town, because I hear it all the time. What you may not realize that I hear more and more is that they're like, well, we looked at the rankings and Farmington and Avon are pretty much good enough for us. We'll go take the house that we can save $2 or $3 or $4 grand in taxes, and we'll come over and we'll take advantage of those natural resources you talked about, and we'll eat at those restaurants and we'll hang out at your parks. But we'll save the cash, and we think the schools there are as good as West Hartford, because at some point those decisions matter. And that's happening more and more. When I used to practice real estate half a dozen years ago, it never happened. It happens more and more, and I hear it from my colleagues too. That's all I'm saying, compromise. That's all I'm looking for.
I'm happy to compromise if you give me the same amount per pupil that Simsbury, Farmington, and Avon, those three communities you said, spend. Because if I have that amount of money, we'll increase the budget dramatically. So if I spend per pupil what they spend, I'm fine with that compromise.
That's not a compromise, but I appreciate your statement.
It's just honesty. It's just honesty. We want an honest
It's really
conversation.
not. It seems like
No, it is. You're saying that people
you
are
know?
choosing those because the taxes are cheaper. You're
Right.
acting as if the only thing that causes taxes in this town is the schools.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm not. But I only have purview over this. So I would love for our friends and colleagues on the council to take this as seriously as I think all 7 of us do in this room. But unfortunately, they probably don't care what Rob Levine says, even though I'd be happy to talk to them. And maybe if we did more of that, maybe we could have some cross discussions. I actually don't understand why we don't do that more often. We had one meeting, and it was like a little over an hour, and I felt like it was very rushed. So to your point, it would be nice if we did do those discussions, because I think we could all share and learn from that. But the bottom line is we're school board folks, so we can only look at the school board budget. So that's what I'm here to do tonight. And again, I appreciate everyone's point of view. I understand where you're coming from. I just have a different perspective, and my whole belief is about compromise. And if you don't feel that tonight's the night that you can do that, I respectfully disagree with that. But at the same time, then let's try and use this then as a jumping off point going forward, so that when we're here 11 months from now, Tom doesn't want to beat me up. Forgive me for being new. Well, you might want to give me a little punch, but that's all right.
I don't have that much control. If I wanted to do that, I would.
I don't know. We are both UMass alums, so I figure I got at least that going. I don't know, maybe I used up all that goodwill. But so I mean, again, I respect where you're coming from. All the folks up here, you guys do yeoman's work. I can't agree with you more, Tom, that I think we have like the best school district. And I wish that we could give you all the money that you want compared to the towns that I've mentioned. But I don't think that's the reality of the situation. So, you know, I try to straddle that fence of, you know, since we want to maintain, I think we're all on the same page that we want to maintain and we want to add things. We want to continue to be dynamic. The last thing we want to get rid of is something that people want in this town. How do we balance that with the realities of the financial situation that the state is in and thereby the town is in? I have real concerns. We like to talk a lot about affordability. And I have genuine concerns that, you know, are the kids and the families going to be able to continue to come into this town so that we have that makeup, that diversity in our schools, if we don't get a handle and a control on our ever-increasing expenditures. Because at some point, those very people that we champion, that are a part of our society in this town, are just going to be priced out. I mean, that's the reality, right? I mean, I don't know how else to say, you know, when you're going to buy a house or even rent in this town, it's going to get to a point, right, where, you know, instead of speaking 74 languages, it might be 54 and then 34 because they're going someplace else that's more reasonable. So that's my point, is that, you know, how do we balance those things? How do we compromise and find a way forward to do those things? It can't be all or nothing. I don't expect it to be 8 million in cuts, you know, or 4 million or 2 million or 1 million. I don't. But I do think we have to consider that, how we go forward, continuing to add things that make us unique and preserve the things that make us unique in a cost-effective way.
Dave?
Thank you. One of the things about being a patient person and not jumping into the conversation is the conversation kind of drifts away, but it came back to what I was going to talk about anyway, so thank you. That's good. But it occurred to me that by design, we're a slower moving board. We don't shoot from the hip. We're more contemplative. I wrote it down, contemplative. I can do that. Okay. We think about things more. And, you know, and just as an example, think about what we do. We have a first reading for policies, and we don't vote on it right then. We mull it over, and then we'll vote it on the next one to get input from the public. You know, if somebody, you know, maybe there's something we didn't consider in that policy. It sounded great in the committee, but when we read it, it was something different. You know, we get a 4-year term. You know, it's not just 2 years because, as they say, there's a longer learning curve for the Board of Ed. We don't move as fast. But when we do need to move fast, we can do that. Last year, we teamed up with the administration when they came back and said, you got to cut $300,000 somewhere. We're working together, made it happen. And we can do that when there's a call for it. I don't see the call for it tonight. You talked about timing, and just as you can say that there has to be some time, I can say that this can wait at this particular time. It's true we did discuss this list of items last year, but none of us went through each item in the last couple of weeks to be prepared to discuss them. It's not as if it was a test where the teacher said you need to know everything that's on this list. I have to give things proper consideration before I can vote as an elected representative. And I cannot do that with things that just come up before me tonight for the first time.
If I could just also point out, we did talk about it last time, but each of the things that you brought up got voted down by well over a majority, except this particular one, which was a close majority. So in that sense, the last time we had a conversation, it was overwhelmingly to not pass it. So in other words, we'd have to have a big conversation to change people's votes, I think is your point. It's not just that we haven't talked about it for a year. Last time we talked about it, it was overwhelmingly not to make the cuts that you're recommending. So if we are going to make the cuts, I would argue at least, we would need a lot more conversation, even forgetting about the question about public input, before we could make these points. But just to be clear, we're having a kind of a specific conversation about PE, but we're also having the global conversation about cuts. So it's not, for those of you looking at your watches, it's not like we're going to have this length of a conversation for each of the motions. Is there anything else on this particular motion? Oh, Mark.
In general, maybe anecdotal, that, you know, there were years where West Hartford didn't have to raise taxes. And I think we kind of remember those years. At least some of us do. And there was a return on investment from this town. And I asked this in our combined town council Board of Ed meeting. And where's our return on investment? You know, Connecticut may not have come out ahead of the country financially. The country's moving a little faster than Connecticut, and other states around us are too. But Wall Street sees this last 12 months as a banner year, minus the last actually few weeks, but what hasn't been that significantly of a drop. Wall Street has seen an increase, a dramatic increase in percentage of income made from investments. And, you know, pretty high numbers get thrown around, and even conservatively, you know, anywhere from 5 to 15%. And that's where and why when the state and the country do well, we don't really have to raise taxes. You know, we have these roll forward budgets that include salaries and insurance, and, you know, they come in at 2.3%, but our investments, our return on investments kind of handles that, and there's no increase. You know, we are 60% of the town's budget, so an increase, just a roll forward increase from our point, raises taxes every single time. Every time there's a roll forward budget, from our point, taxes will increase without any return on investment. And I just hope that we can find, you know, we can find that return on investment at some point, because Wall Street did very well, and I don't think, and have not seen, I think we, as a town, made $1.5 million, which in the real world wasn't a significant amount of money, and by no means am I laughing at $1.5 million. It's just that when you look at the numbers of where they could be on our return on investment, I think there was potential there to make more money and actually try to cushion some of these ebbs and flows that we see in our budgets year after year. And we're not there yet, unfortunately. So I just, you know, my point on the investment side is, you know, I wish that we could see some real growth so that this conversation would be so much easier.
That's for sure. So is there anything more to say about this particular motion, which we do have to vote on before we move on? All ready to vote? So the motion is to move PE from 1.5 credits to 1.25 credits. Did I say that right? Right. And we're right, because we're not talking about the other ones yet, because this is the only thing on the motion. All in favor of this cut, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
Surprisingly enough, the noes have it. Are there other specific motions to be made for cuts or additions?
I just actually want to respond to the comment, to kind of following up Dave's point of like the conversation shifts. So you made a comment right before Mark, I think it was, about last year and how it was 7-0 on so many of these things. I just want to offer up, Tom was kind enough to email us earlier tonight, and I'm just looking, and based on the issues that I emailed 23 hours ago or whatever, there was only two, it looks like two or three out of all of these that were 7-0. A lot of them were 5-2. That last one was 4-3.
Absolutely, but if you look at the longer
debate.
Oh, there was huge debate. No, all I meant was these are 1, 2.
No,
these are 8 of them.
that's actually not true, because a lot were agreed to be sent out before it even came to a vote.
I'm just talking about the ones that were on my list.
No,
not the
no, because there are ones on your list like M2 so M3 defeated 7-0, M1 defeated 7-0, M2 agreed to be excluded from consideration by unanimous consent of the board.
Right.
GSS 1 defeated 5-2.
Right.
But E2 unanimous consent.
Yep.
Supervisor 1, you look at it 2A 7-0 and then another one 7-0. So it's really 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them that were unanimous consent or 7-0.
Yeah, and there was maybe an equal amount that were, anyway, I mean, it's semantics.
No. But it's not semantics, because you're right. In this list, it's not all 7-0.
That's all I wanted to make the point.
No,
I
but
think
when we
there was some
talked about
discord there and discussion.
No, well, all I meant was that when we had the conversation last time at the meeting, I meant for the entire list of cuts. I didn't know which ones you were going to advocate for.
No, I know.
That was what I meant about there were more 7-0s.
Yeah, that's fine. No, I understand. I watched it. I was just talking about my list. Like,
oh, absolutely.
I didn't want the public to think that I brought up all these things and everybody just was 7-0 last year on all of them, and I'm rabble-rousing. That's all I'm
Absolutely
saying.
Right. Absolutely right.
That's not what I'm trying to do here.
I understand. Okay, well. Absolutely, that's right. That's right. That was the boys against the girls. Yep. We won't go into that, though. Okay. Are there other specific motions to change the budget before we have a general conversation about the budget per se?
I had other ones, but based on how that one went, which I thought was the easiest one, I'm going to stand down, okay? Because that seems like the right thing to do. But I would like to have a little bit longer discussion in general.
Well, did you? You should answer that first. No, actually, I was just going to say if there isn't any further, then yes, we absolutely have a conversation. Even if there are more to be discussed, we should have a robust conversation afterwards before we vote on the budget. So no question about that. Deb, you?
So I'd like to make a motion, mainly for the purpose of discussion. I'm not sure how I'm going to come down on things, but I'm going to have some questions around this issue. So I guess the right way to do it is to make a motion first, see if I can get a second, and then offer questions up. And my motion would be to reduce the increase, the proposed increase for TAs and special ed TAs. And specifically, I would recommend raising pay for substitutes and TAs to $89 instead of the $90 proposed, and for special ed TAs to $92 instead of the $95 proposed. And that is a 2.3% increase for TAs and substitutes, and a 5.7% increase for this new category of special ed TAs. I know we do have trouble filling some of these positions, so I think I would really like to hear how we think the raises might impact our ability to fill the position. So that's my motion.
The special ed TA.
Yep, it would be $92 for special ed TAs. So 89 and 92. So that's my motion.
All right, so.
Wait, is there a second?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry? I'll second. Second. Okay, now discussion. And Gretchen, you provided some numbers before, I think, too. I don't know if you want to speak to it now, but.
I do have some numbers around our vacancy issues, and I think, Rick, you can probably speak to how it compares. Which one would you like to hear first? All right. So we currently have 2.4 open positions in the district for special ed TAs, and we have had 7 schools that have never been fully staffed all year, not one day. We have 5 schools that were fully staffed less than 2 months, and we have 5 schools that have had periodic vacancies throughout the year, but periods where we were fully staffed. And so in order to meet the needs, especially for students with IEPs, we have had to borrow from building TAs, taking them out of classrooms. We have also had to hire subs as TAs in order to fill those required positions. Our department supervisors and pupil services have hired 81 TAs this year. That doesn't mean we had 81 people fill, because many of those positions were multiple vacancies within the same position. Oftentimes, TAs would be hired and then they would quit 24 hours later, 36 hours later, and so sometimes TAs were hired 3 and 4 times for the same position. So that process of hiring 81 people involves at least 2 to 3 interviews per position. And so for the department supervisors whose primary responsibility is to support teacher instruction and supervision and to provide support for PPTs, they're spending an awful lot of time in the office hiring. And we have had a very difficult time filling those positions and meeting those legally required spots. And so time after time, TAs have given us the feedback that the pay is low in comparison to other districts and other jobs, and that's one of the reasons that we've had difficulty filling them.
A question, do we know what other districts are paying for special ed TAs? I think that'd be useful.
So many districts with TAs versus substitutes will pay an hourly rate. So we pay $87 a day, which works out to be about $11-something an hour. Other districts will pay in that $15 an hour range. And just to add something to what Gretchen just said, of the 80 TAs that they hired this year in special ed, 53 of them left during the year. So that was an over 50% turnover this year, and primarily around money. And not to say that $95 would, dramatically change that, because it's not a huge increase, but it will help, certainly.
Rick, I have a question. So the TAs that leave because of the money, is it the money and the expectations and functions of the job that they feel is just overwhelming for what we're giving them?
It's a good question, and it is a combination of the two. So for $11 an hour, and they're all, remember, most of our teaching assistants are certified teachers, just getting out of school, looking for that first teaching job, and taking this position in West Hartford, hoping to have that open a door for them for a full-time teaching position. And then they're working, primarily one-on-one with a lot of our special ed students, and it can be demanding and rigorous, and so it's a combination of the pay and certainly some of the job responsibilities as well.
Another one. And Gretchen, I wanted to ask you, when you borrow from the other schools, what type of gap does that leave for those particular schools when they're not present?
So typically they're borrowing within a building of other building TAs, and it could be for 45 minutes, it could be for an hour and a half, it could be for a full day. So it really varies on a case-by-case basis. I'm sure the principals who are behind me could attest to the impact a little bit more than I could, but it really does impact instruction in the classroom. And so those TAs that are typically supporting teachers, they're not. They're with our students, still doing very, very important work. But everybody's coming together, and you like to see everyone working together, but it's not always in the best interest of children.
Just Rick or whoever, what's the financial impact on having to hire 50 people, and what's the impact to the district as far as turnover cost? In a business, turnover cost you X, and so what do you have that number? Is it readily?
I don't. We could calculate that, Mark, and it would be pretty substantial when you look at the salaries of the department supervisors and directors and principals that are hiring these folks, and the time that they put in to hire someone who will come here and literally could leave in 2 days. Then we're bringing another 6 or 7 people in, bringing them in through the interview process. So we could do that work. Probably the bigger impact is the impact that it's having on kids when they're not getting that support day in and day out.
So there's a financial impact, and then, and Deb, I applaud you for bringing this up. I really do, and I'm smiling. And this is funny. I've never had this happen before, quite honestly.
This is a moment to remember.
This is. So remember this, folks. Because, the impact, and I applaud you again, this is great stuff, right? But this is 3/10,000ths of a savings. I did the numbers. And I don't think the juice is worth the squeeze. And listen, I'm on this side, right? So when I say that, because it's the impact on principals, teachers, kids, I always, I come at it a perspective as, how does it impact the classroom? Anything, how does it impact the classroom? If, I'm on record for voting for increases for more iPads and such like that, because it helps with the impact in the classrooms. So I hate to see a 3/10,000ths percentage have an impact, with the principal spending more time. And quite honestly, I think next year we're going to see this number go up maybe $5 more to still to go to with our competitors around us. So I see this as a continuous movement on this number, and the impact is so insignificant, but yet maybe it helps with the teachers, the principals, and HR and things like that. So that's all I'm trying to wrap my arms around. So, but thank you.
Yeah, so it should say 92.
92?
The number will change.
So,
52,000 is the number?
No, it'll be 69,000, I think. Yeah. Okay. So a follow-up question, Gretchen. Creating a separate category, as this proposal does, how would that impact, say, next year, if we still need to take a regular TA out of a classroom and turn that person for a day, poof them into a special ed TA? Will that be difficult for us to track? now that person is going to have a different pay rate for a portion of a day or the whole day. I'm just curious how the logistics, I mean, obviously, we don't need to get into the logistics of it. We just need to ensure that you all can track all of that.
It's, they fill out weekly timesheets, so it's easy to track. It's a manual process anyways. So for the days, they'd be paid at $90, and the fifth day, they'd be paid at $95. Yeah, so it involves some work, but we can overcome it.
I want to be honest about subpay. You know, we didn't go through all the area. It's not, where we are isn't dramatically different with the regular substitute pay, except for with one place. And one neighboring, no, well, yes, probably. But as far as, you know, people that are getting calls, Hartford's the biggest difference. We're there $117 a day. So, I mean, it's the same people registered, so it's kind of where you're going to pick the, you know, so.
Which it seems to me is actually a perfect example of money matters, but it doesn't matter that much. In the sense of, if that if your choice is $87 versus $117, well, that's kind of easy. On the other hand, it doesn't mean that everybody's going to go to Hartford if they don't want that job. So money matters, and so does our reputation as a good quality place.
Okay, I was just going to say, I kind of echo some of Mark's comments. You know, I can't support this. I appreciate you digging into this stuff, but just hearing that they had me at the whole, you know, staff time. Again, being a private sector guy, like I know what it's like hiring and how laborious it is, especially when you lose that person after going through that process. So if it's a $69,000 savings, but you have staff time to that level of 50% turnover, then there's no savings going on. I mean, we're in the red big time. I don't know what the number is, but I'm sure if you did the math, we sit here and our faces might go pale a little bit. So I think if anything, we have to, you know, absolutely support this increase. And to Mark's point, probably sit here again next year and you guys inform us what the turnover is, and if it's still elevated like that, then we're going to have to adjust again. So see, Tom, I can actually, I can support an increase. All right, fine, let's cut it. So again, thanks, Deb. And you know, this is the kind of stuff that we should talk about. There's no, in my mind, cut too small, but this is not one that I would support.
So I'll just state that I don't know whether or not this is a good idea for a cut. But my concern is that this special ed TA position seems to be a really challenging position. And I'm not sure that raising the pay rate is the only solution. So I hope that we can look at, I mean, are there other things that we can do to reduce turnover, to make this a more attractive position for particularly if somebody is already a certified teacher?
I appreciate the opportunity to look at that, and I do have some ideas to put forward for next year. You know, don't want to speak off the cuff right now, but there are definitely ways that we can support our TAs because they're absolutely integral to the way that we function as a department.
And I just remind, that's the pay with, there is no benefits attached to the position either.
So I guess, yeah, when I started doing the numbers, I was like, I think I got to redo them. This isn't a yearly salary. This isn't times 52 weeks. This is times 181 days, right? So this is $16,500 or almost $16,600 a yearly salary because they don't.
If you're employed every day.
Yeah, that's no, only for the school year.
No. But if you're employed every single day of the school year.
Of the school year.
Right.
There's no sick days.
No sick days or anything like that. So you know, you can't even go out as a yearly salary times 2080. So, but that number means something too.
So I feel really happy that we've had this discussion, and I do appreciate your promise to look into how we can make this position one that has lower turnover. Again, I'm not convinced that raising the rate to $95 will do it, but I am going to withdraw my motion for tonight, and let's hope that creating this secondary category, this special ed TA category with a higher rate of pay, let's hope that makes at least a little bit of a difference moving into the next school year. And if there is anything that we can do even in, mid-year next year, that would be great. And so I will withdraw my motion.
No. I think withdrawing is cool. I'm gathering that there's no more specific motions to amend the budget, but we haven't yet discussed the budget. So unless I'm incorrect about that, let's just move to a conversation about the budget in general. Mark.
So listen, there were two discussions here today. One didn't go so well, one did. And I would just ask for a little more decorum when we discuss these things, so that we can have decent conversations going forward. I mean, we even talked a little bit about last meeting, how we shouldn't interrupt people and such. So all I'm asking is that there were two examples here of discussion, and I hope that we can carry one of them forward as we continue as a board.
I'll just piggyback on that. I don't take anything personally here. None of the comments that I make are directed in a personal nature. So everybody volunteers their time here. Well, you guys are paid. Those of us that are volunteers, but even the folks that are paid are here late. And so, we're all on the same side. I think that message sometimes gets lost in the heat of the moment. I truly believe that everybody's here for the same reason. I think we just sometimes take a different path to get to a solution on things or hopeful compromise. So, I second Mark's point where it's nice to have debate. And look, you can get a little heated in the moment. I think it's human nature. Everybody can do that. But it's nice when we can kind of just have like a discussion and debate, and we can disagree and try and always work to that end. But at the same time, no one should feel bad if they go a little off the rail a little bit because something hits them in that soft spot. So I think that's human nature. But I agree with Mark. It's certainly the one conversation was a little bit smoother than the other one, and I'm not sure we're done tonight. But I will second his point.
In that spirit, can I suggest that although we're not talking about specifics in terms of voting, that maybe we start thinking about what kinds of questions to ask moving forward so that we're not even waiting till the second workshop to necessarily have a conversation about this. So to give an example from this year, although this was before you guys got on the board, last year we had a difficult conversation about teaming. And so we asked for a presentation that would talk about the pros and cons of teaming. And we got it. And that in part is why I think those of us who were here at that point were sympathetic to teaming. Now, in all fairness, the three new people at least had not heard that, so I'm not criticizing anybody. But that's an example, it seems to me, of where we said, let's look at this and see whether it would make sense in the future. And I think if we can spend some of our conversation now and then into, as we think of it in the next few months, things like that, to say, well, what if we did X? And then we had a kind of investigation of it, then we might, when the time comes to have a budget, we can say, well, I'm sorry, we heard X and Y and we vote X, but everybody knows what's on the table. So that seems to me in a way to be a model of what we can do moving forward, what kinds of things, and it might be teaming again, I'm just using that as an example, things that we think might be worth investigating. And you're right, it's not necessarily to make cuts, it might be to make additions that are going to help us in the long run make other sorts of cuts. So you're right about that. But maybe we can flesh out some of those areas that we hope we can get some more information on before we're asked to vote yay or nay on them.
Yeah, like process and expectations. I think we can set those, I think we would be better off.
Yeah, I mean, cuts is such a dirty word in this room. So yeah, I mean, using TME as an example, I actually did watch the video. Thanks, Dave. And it was a very interesting discussion. And it's my understanding that we have been doing that for the better part of 30-something years, right? But not everybody does it everywhere. And so, you know, watching that debate, this is a prime example where you're right, to your point, it wouldn't necessarily be a cut. It would be a discussion about, all right, well, this is what we've done for a long time. Can we look at one or two other models? Maybe there's only one. This is where your guys' expertise will certainly educate us. And then having that holistic discussion about, okay, so if we did consider moving from the TME model after that debate, then if we achieved savings by doing that, could we then apply that savings to adding things that our superintendent so passionately talked about, as far as, you know, what more could we now do with that savings? Because that is a lot, in my mind, how cuts work. They aren't necessarily, you know, a zero sum where it's just, you know, we cut $1 million from the budget. It's like, well, maybe if we did reallocate resources, where we said, okay, well, we don't need to spend that money in that way anymore because we found a better way or an alternative way that's acceptable to do it. And now we've just freed up money to potentially add some things on the superintendent and his staff's wish list that we maybe couldn't do before. Maybe we save a little money too.
Yeah, I want to add to this budget discussion with the overall budget coming forward to us. I know we're having a discussion about it, but I have to say that I'm going to support this budget, and in the beginning, I was looking at cuts. But I was very apprehensive in terms of just, a lot like you said, Tom, just making a cut in a particular line item without having all of the information in terms of who it impacts, teachers, students, programs, a number of things that have put West Hartford in the top %, and why people move here. And I just think that we have to be careful when we're making these types of decisions, because it's very impactful on students and why people move to this town. They move to this town because we have great programs, we have excellent graduation rates, our children get into colleges and universities that are top in their particular category, and it's a public school education. So the type of education that we deliver is very comparable to our private partners or private school partners neighboring in our particular town. And one of the things I think for me was the increase in the incoming 9th graders and the outgoing 12th graders in that 5.5 FTE. And I said, 5.5 FTE seems like a lot. But when you break down the numbers with the number of kids that are coming in and the number of teachers that are allocated for those kids, and you're looking at the number of students that are going to be in those classes in comparison to the teachers. And I really have to say, if it was my kid or if it was my neighbor's kid who was talking to me, would you really want your child to be in a classroom with 26, 27, which possibly could go up during the year? Because I have experienced that when students drop down in their particular classes because that class wasn't what they thought it was going to be, or maybe became difficult. They even probably told themselves, I'm going to stick it out, but they're struggling, and their teachers know that they're struggling, so they're telling them, okay, you need to drop down a level. And if you're dropping down a level and that class already has a large number of students in that particular class, what does that do to the teacher? And what does that do to the students? Some of these little things we don't realize. We're not that student sitting in the class, and we're not that teacher teaching that class. And some of my board members have teachers, have spouses that are teachers. But for the broader audience, that's real impactful, because if you have a child that's coming home day after day and is in agony because they're not getting the information, and the teacher is trying to do everything they can, but they've got a large number of other students that they're also trying to teach, that's not fair. And I just want to piggyback on what Tom said also. If we're going to begin to look at cuts, I think we need to have that kind of conversation early on so that we can receive input and be transparent. Because at the end of the day, it comes down to that student. And it's all of our students. It's not your student or my student, but it's all of the students here in our district. And I'm going to support this budget, but I am mindful that going forward next year, that we do have a lot of work to do. And collectively, all of us, administrators, teachers, board members, and we need to start early on so that we can be educated about the decisions that we have to make.
Before I share my comments, I just want to say I just came from a wonderful experience program here at the Town Hall honoring the 50th anniversary of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s. I've been to the mountaintop speech, and just hearing his words and hearing the comments and the young people really just reminded us of how diverse our town is and the talents we have within our town. And it just made me think of one of Dr. King's quotes where he says, "The true measure of a man is not where he stands in times of comfort and convenience, but rather where he stands in times of challenge and controversy." So I welcome and I'm glad we're having this conversation that is enriching. I too am in favor of supporting the budget as is. I certainly welcome what Cheryl has suggested in terms of moving forward, having more open lines of communication sooner than later. I will preface as being one of the new persons here, certainly wanting to have as much opportunity as possible, not only to review and to process, but certainly to hear from the constituents as well. But I also want to say many times we talk about numbers and cuts, or I'll rephrase as terms of revisions, trying to be fiscally responsible. But I also, for myself, and I believe for my colleagues as well, at the end of the day, the priority lies with who it's impacting. And I know you also made reference to this as well, Carol, and that is our children. That is our young people. So when we think about being fiscally responsible, we have to think of how that trickles down and how that may impact our young people. And I also, too, want to give a shout out. I'm glad that we are not moving forward in terms of decreasing the proposed increase rate for our TAs. And I say that because there are frontline persons, and unfortunately many times our frontline warriors are the ones who get hacked at the first. And I just, that's difficult for me to support. Having been on the front line, having worked with people on the front line, I see it firsthand. And there's so many things that happen on a daily basis that go way beyond that $11 per hour rate that a person may get. So I welcome the original proposed budget as shared by our superintendent, and I very much welcome the open lines and fruitful discussion that we've been having so far tonight.
Carol, I just want to say thank you for bringing up, thank you for your comments. But I'm skipping over you and referring to Carol, because she struck a chord with me about the FTE. I appreciate your thoughtful consideration. It kind of gets at a core issue for me about class size. It kind of feels like the third rail where like nobody really wants to address it. I share your genuine concern as far as, we have this this conception, whether it's accurate or not, about when you get to these number of 26, 27, how it's detrimental. Experienced it firsthand with my fifth grader. When he got placed in his class, I looked at the list and I kept looking down and down and down. I'm like, well, this seems like an awfully large class. There's like 27 kids or something like that in his class. So I'm like, well, wait a minute. We always talk about small class size in West Hartford. My son's already in a big class. Yet here we are, fast forward from that day in August till April, and he's thriving. The point is that I worry about us in general, and this is just one example, but in everything in education, glossing over where something is always bad or something is always good. We talk so much about the diversity of our schools, and we have to drill down to that very small level of understanding that while there is certainly that child that is going to suffer in that environment, other children will and have and continue to thrive. And we received information earlier tonight about the number of classes we already have that have 26 or more students, and that if we were to reduce, the 5.5, that that's just keeping us as the same staffing level. So then that number would grow, and so I wanted to have a sense of out of that number that we presented of the whole number of classes, and it's I think less than 8%. I don't know, is that too big a number? I'm not prejudging. I'm not saying it's too small. I'm not saying it's too big. I'm not saying it's just right. I'm not sure where Goldilocks is here. It'd be interesting to know. You know, we talk about unfunded mandates from the state. I think as a board, we love to give mandates to our hardworking staff folks, homework assignments. There's no extra credit here, but I do think it'd be interesting to know. Like, so if we've got about 7.5% to 8% of our total population of kids in classes that are 26 or 27 or higher, again, I'm just a ranking guy. So how do we rank compared to our competitors as far as, are we way below them? Are we way above them? Or are we in the ballpark? There's my baseball reference again. I had to get that in at least once. But I think the onus is on us to know that information, because, you know, if first of all, if we're trying to be competitive, which I know Tom is all about, and so are we, if we're low, is there a potential to then increase that number and say go from 7.7 to 8 or 8.7 or 9% of our classes? And what savings would we realize there that we could then maybe apply that to some other wish list items or savings in some way? Because I just feel like I've studied this issue for a long time in my past lives of being an education analyst for the state of New York. We looked at class sizes and year-round education and all types of interesting subjects. And there's always been this drive, I think forever, I mean, at least in my adult life of over 20 years, is small class sizes equals success. And I guess it just kind of is curious to me of like, well, but those larger classes, there are kids that are thriving there too. So does that mean that's always bad? I think it's more to the point of, well, we really just need to identify those children that whether they're in a small class or a large class, because I think it's naive to think that it doesn't happen in a class of 17 students, that there isn't a kid that's struggling. There's no magic formula, right? We have these amazing teachers that identify those problems, and then they work as a team to help that child reach up. So I think it'd be interesting to have that conversation going forward, because it goes to the philosophy of the mission that we're doing, but there's also a financial impact. And so there's, I think, something to dig into there, in my opinion.
I just want to respond, Rob. It's great that your child is thriving, although he's in a larger class. But I do know for your child that's thriving, there are many others that are not, because they are in a larger class. And for one reason or another, maybe they need a little more attention, and that teacher's unable to do that because there's other students that need needs as well. So that's what we have to be mindful for. And I think that's why we have the experts at the table that can guide us in terms of what's the best option that we, go with.
For what it's worth, I am taking notes on topics that are coming up so that we can think about addressing them going forward before we have a big, dramatic conversation about the budget. Other comments? Are we ready to vote on the budget?
I have a comment.
Oh, please.
Yep. Earlier, somebody mentioned return on investment. I mean, how do you measure return on investment in our children? We're building our future here. That's our task. That's why we're here. I mean, we look at what's happening in Colorado. There are 100 districts in Colorado that have dropped down to a 4-day school week. 4 days, so that they can save taxpayer money. We look at what's happening in Oklahoma and Kentucky, where teachers are rallying at the state capitol, begging for their first pay increase in 10 years. In 10 years. With textbooks that are falling apart, that are so old that they really, truly are history textbooks with no current events or near current events. We invest in our teachers. We invest in our children here. And that's what this budget does. This budget protects the programs that we know work, and I think it tries to address some of the problems and concerns that we know still remain in the district. It's a budget that tries to prepare our 18 to 21-year-old students with disabilities for a more independent future. That is smart planning for those students, for their families, and for our town. In addition, it's smart planning for our schools, because financially we may be able to make a little bit of money on this program if it takes off. It's a budget that tries to help families that are dealing with complex mental health issues. These are families that often have nowhere to turn. They feel so alone that their children can't go to school, that they're risking an inpatient placement because they just absolutely cannot figure out how to help their kids live a fairly normal life and get the services they need in school where their peers are and where they can participate in co-curricular and extracurricular activities. That's the investment. That's the return on investment. Can we look at different ways of doing things, maybe make our investment a little bit differently? Sure, and that's what we're going to spend the next many months doing. When we come back here next March, we may have some different ideas on how to invest in our children. But we want to be smart about it. We want to get all the information we can, just the way anybody making an investment would. So I'm going to vote for this budget. I want to personally thank all of the teachers in our town, all the administrators who have put up with some sort of random questions from me and from the other board members over the last couple of weeks while we've been in deliberation, so that we can really get the information that we need so that we know what we're voting on. And that's our job, to represent the people in this town so that we can keep our schools performing where they are, given all of the different impacts that our town is having from the economy, the state economy, and so forth. And I would urge my colleagues to also support this budget.
Any other comments? Are we ready to vote? Okay. All in favor of the board adopting the 2018-2019 Board of Education budget as presented, please say aye.
Aye.
No?
No.
No thanks.
Abstentions? Okay, the ayes have it. Thank you all. We have no new business, but we do have the superintendent's report.
We don't, that's cut on board of, that was the superintendent.
We have no superintendent's report. He is done for the evening. Staff reports and board discussions, anything to report there? Okay, then the financial report is next. May I have a motion that we approve the financial report for the period ending February 28th, 2018?
So moved.
Second? Second. Okay, now we get to hear the presentation before we vote.
This is up to me, thank you, and Chip is going to follow along on the screen, but he's got to be pretty fast tonight because there's not a lot of movement in the budget. If you go to page 4 of your board packet, look in the far right column, you see the change from the previous month. Now we're looking at the report for the period ending February 28th, 2018. And if you look at the far right column, the changes, you see variances minus 10,000, minus 21,000, and then you see we're up 20, up 30, up 30. These are all just minor updates in salaries as far as principal salaries and teacher salaries, etc. Overall, at the very bottom of the list here, it comes out to $24,000. So in the big picture, it's not a big change for the month on that. Next page. Page 5, state and federal grants. Really nothing here, only minor updates that you can see there as well. If we flip over to page 6, this is because we're in mid-year, special funds, no changes. And then the big one that we always like to discuss is nutrition services. And this is coming out pretty good as well. The increase or loss is at $34,000. Food services continues to look stable and it's close to break even. That's good. I did learn something that I found very interesting. I asked about salad bar days. And it turns out that when we are on the days that we have a salad bar on Wednesdays, lunch sales are down about 10%. That's something interesting. So we need to push those salads some more. Or. So it's something to keep in mind. Now, remember, the nutrition services budget is separate from other budgets, and that's always interesting. I always like the story I was told, and correct me if I'm wrong, back in the day, they used to make money in nutrition services, and in fact, they used that money to pay for the kitchen at Bristow, at the new school. And we're in a different situation today, a different reality. I don't know that we can ever get back to where we were, but maybe someday we'll see some changes where it won't always be a struggle. Certainly hope so. Any questions on the budget?
I have a point of clarification. This is sort of related to the budget discussion, but also to the financial report. So for clarification, all of the money that we take in as lunch money from the kids goes straight into this nutrition services fund and cannot be transferred over to the general fund for education, correct?
That is generally correct. I mean, in the past, when we've generated a surplus in this account, when we used to serve a million meals a year instead of 680,000, that surplus at the end of the year we were able to use for capital purposes. Like we invest it, you can invest in the things that are generating the lunches. So we could invest in the kitchens. It paid for the Bristow kitchen, as Dave mentioned. We also upgraded a lot of the other kitchens. There were walk-in freezers, there were walk-in refrigerators. We changed some serving lines around. Those are the uses that we can use this money for. Other than that, there are strict limits because, as you can see, you know, at least in last year, 1.3 million of that money came from the feds. 1.3 million came from paid lunches. So there are strict rules as to what we can do with that money.
Thank you.
Anything else? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Oh, so all in favor of accepting the budget?
Aye.
Aye. I mean, just wanted to vote the budget again, just had to hear that again. Yes, the financial report, please say aye.
Hey,
Opposed?
Chip, did you stay up for a second?
Okay.
I just have a,
No, but I just
Yep.
wanted, so the ayes?
Yeah.
Okay. The ayes have it. Before we go to approval of the minutes, you had a question?
yeah, and it has to deal with lunch, and, you know, we were talking about the budget, and intimately close of why we make less money at the school lunch program. And although we're 21% free and reduced lunch,
Correct.
21% free and reduced lunch, and we have to follow certain standards, federal standards, and part of those federal standards have affected the lunch program financially, and one of them, I think Chip could talk about, is bottled water. We had a tremendous sales in bottled water, and we made a lot of money back in the day at the high
We're
school.
still doing bottled water.
But it's a different number, right?
No, well, no, we're still selling bottled water. It's French fries that we weren't allowed to sell anymore.
I thought when the cooler fillers
I mean, different schools have made different
Right.
initiatives to reduce the plastic consumption,
Right,
and that
right.
has,
Okay,
you know,
but there was, back in the day when we're paying for
And
the Bristow lunch, kitchen, I don't know if it's worth looking into not following the federal standards and leaping out of that in order to make a more palatable lunch.
right now, the feds are contributing $1.3 million a year in revenue to the program. So that's a pretty substantial impact to the program. It would be very difficult to make up that amount of money.
Even if we got back to the old numbers?
Even if we got back to the old numbers.
Because don't we make, isn't it roughly the same? We make about 1.3 million in lunches sold?
It's roughly 50-50 between lunches and...
So we'd have to double the number, basically.
So,
Does the federal money cover the cost of free and reduced lunch for families?
yeah, so we get $3.23 for every free lunch that we serve, $2.81 for every reduced lunch that we serve, and 31 cents for every paid lunch that we serve. From the feds, we get another 10 or 16 cents from the state government for those things, and we'd forego all of those funds. The only towns that have gone away from the free and reduced, the federal program, are the wealthier towns with 5%, 3%, 2% for your reduced lunch. And then they make accommodations to allow those students to get a free lunch.
And in the near future, they may be re-looking at how this is calculated also, so that could shift us upward. It's not definitive yet, but we could have news on that soon.
Since I know that, the standards went in a few years ago, and yet every year we're still down from the year before. So that makes me wonder if you think that there might be other factors as well as food contributing to declining lunch sales.
Yeah, the reason we're down this year is we raised the price by 25 cents. I mean, every year you raise, that's been the historical pattern. We have to raise, remember I was talking about there was $3.23 for free lunch and 31 cents for paid lunch. Once that gap changes every year by the feds, and we have to make sure our lunch prices match that gap. So about every 3 or 4 years, we have to increase our lunch prices to meet their, equity guidelines by around 25 cents. And every year that we do that increase, we basically see a 0% revenue change, because whatever, there's lunch is price elastic. So when we raise the prices, people will bring their own lunch. And so, but the following year, then the lunch numbers tend to creep back up. And the other reason that we're dropping in lunch counts is because we're dropping in student counts.
So I think I asked this question a few months ago, and I'll just ask again. If we can look at the trends by grade level, because I think it's possible that we're going to see that maybe the kids who are coming in now as 5- and 6-year-olds into kindergarten, maybe those families are just not into the buying lunch thing as much as the kids who are graduating. It could be sort of a generational difference in just what people are used to doing, and I think it would be interesting to take a look at that.
It's tough to say, I do take a look at that regularly. We meet with Tim and we talk about the percentage of paid lunch, paid lunch participation, all those, we take a look at all those types of things. And the strongest indicator of paid lunch participation is the overall economic welfare of the school. So that has a big impact on the lunch volume. But it's not, it's not like at the high school we have 50% paid lunch participation, and the elementary schools we have 30. I mean, it's a general trend. Fundamentally, I mean, if you can't provide salt, fat, and sugar, which is fundamentally is what you do, as a member of that great article, The Bliss Point. That's the best food article ever written in the New York Times. That's what they all do, is they try and find that match. And my favorite is sugar and fat. Give me double stuffed Oreos anytime.
We don't even have pickles, right? Do we have pickles back yet, or no? Because
I don't know the specific
so I don't think
details.
We have pickles.
That's probably they're pretty high
day.
Salt, would be my guess.
Yeah, exactly. So these are the kinds of things that have happened. Back in the day, you used to be able to go buy a Good Humor ice cream bar, and those days are gone. And I could just tell you what I bring to the table. My kids have never bought a meal from middle school on. They've bought every once in a while in elementary, but never in middle school, because it's just not. And believe me, my wife would pay $1,000 a week not to have to make lunches. Well, listen, it's right into the fund. Yeah.
You're going to add sushi to the menu.
It's one of her bone of contentions. So anyway, but there's a lot of problems with the school lunch program right now, and it is what it is. That's why I asked. But if 21% is too big of a number to leap from, then
other random issues? No, it's quite all right. Okay, approval of the minutes. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes of the regular Board of Education meeting of March 20th, 2018?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay, any changes? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Surprisingly, the ayes have it. Okay. Information and reports from board members. Oh.
I got to go to International Night at Bugby last week. I want to thank Principal Browse for inviting us. Always appreciate any other principals got an event you'd like to have us, let us know. Happy to be there.
Thank you.
I'll talk about.
Oh, go ahead.
So I and a few other people and some great Conardin Hall students attended West Hartford Cooking over the weekend. Fantastic event. If any of the listening audience has never attended, I encourage you to attend. You will have a fabulous night, and I understand that their fundraising amount was quite, what do I want to say? Yeah, very successful. So they had a great night, and all of the proceeds that came in, I believe, topped last year. So for those of you who didn't attend this year, please be sure to come out and join us next year. Great food all around.
Carol, I think you still owe me a recipe.
Oh, that's right. I'll get it to you.
That's what we need on our board retreat. That's right, everybody to bring something. Other reports from you guys? Anything you want to add to your earlier report? Okay. Future meeting dates. We have a regular Board of Education meeting on Tuesday, April 17th, Tuesday, May 1st, Tuesday, May 15th, and Tuesday, June 5th. All at 7 o'clock, all here. Any requests for future agenda items other than the conversations that we're going to have about next year?
Cheryl, on the
Please.
June 5th meeting, that's when we're receiving the report from the Rethinking School Start Times Committee, correct?
Alex, I'll send you the updated agenda. We'll report beforehand, and then that night would be the night that you would vote. So there's actually 2 reports still from late school start times to come. So we'll be sending out the survey shortly after vacation with the information. So more to come on that. I'll send it in the update this week.
Thank you. I think that a lot of people were really interested in that issue. So just to lay it out there that we will be voting on that on June 5th, but people will have an opportunity to provide input via survey or by email and listen to the reports that are coming our way.
Do we have a mechanism for folks who don't have internet access to provide input? The old write a letter?
I get letters still. So it could
Brick through the
public
window?
comment. Yeah, I get those too.
Phone calls, got those too? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and again, just to be clear, any decision we make about the school start times, other than leaving it alone, would not be implemented for next year. It would be a year in advance, so that we'd have plenty of time to plan, if that's what we vote to do. Other questions? Okay. Any comments from visitors? Such happy people in the audience, they have nothing to add. So we have no executive session, and so a move to adjourn would be in appropriate. Second. All in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned.
Everybody stuck it out.